There are places that linger in the collective memory of a town, stories whispered in the dark, daring others to face their fears. The abandoned school on the outskirts of town was one of those places. It stood as a decaying monument to a tragedy that happened long ago, a fire that consumed the lives of children and their headmistress, leaving behind only charred walls and unanswered questions. Curiosity had always been my downfall, and the lure of that forsaken building proved too much to resist. I had heard the tales of ghostly laughter, unseen footsteps, and phantom handprints appearing on dusty windows. Some even claimed to see the spectral figure of the headmistress, endlessly searching for her lost students. Rationality told me these were just stories, but a part of me, a dark and reckless part, needed to know the truth. It was a cold, moonless night when I decided to go. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of morbid curiosity, I approached the rusted gate that creaked ominously as I pushed it open. The path leading to the school was overgrown with weeds, nature slowly reclaiming what was left behind. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and every step I took seemed to echo into the emptiness around me. The school's entrance loomed ahead, its doors hanging askew, barely holding on to their hinges. As I crossed the threshold, the temperature seemed to drop, a chill seeping into my bones. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, revealing long-forgotten desks and chairs, scattered haphazardly, as if the students had fled in a panic. The walls were blackened with soot, remnants of the fire that had claimed so many lives. I wandered the halls, my footsteps disturbingly loud in the stillness. The stories of laughter and footsteps played in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I stopped in front of a classroom, the door ajar, and pushed it open. The beam of my flashlight revealed a room frozen in time. Tiny desks, some overturned, others with books still open on them, filled the space. The blackboard at the front bore the faint traces of a lesson cut short. A sudden noise made me spin around. It was faint, like the sound of distant giggles, but unmistakable. My heart pounded as I swept the flashlight's beam through the hallway. There was no one there, yet the laughter persisted, growing louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I backed out of the classroom, the laughter following me. My pulse quickened, and a sense of unease settled over me. The stories, the warnings, they all seemed too real now. I moved deeper into the building, driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity, until I reached the stairs leading to the second floor. The wooden steps groaned under my weight, each creak amplifying the silence around me. At the top of the stairs, I turned a corner and saw a shadow flit across the hallway. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but enough to make me question my sanity. I followed, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The shadow led me to another classroom, this one in even worse condition. The windows were broken, allowing the cold night air to seep in, and the floor was littered with debris. Then, I saw them. Handprints, small and smudged, on the dusty window pane. They hadn't been there a moment ago. Panic surged through me, but before I could react, I heard it. A whisper. So close, it felt like it was right next to my ear. "Help us!" I turned, expecting to see someone, anyone, but the hallway was empty. The whisper came again, more desperate this time. "Help us. Please." My mind raced, trying to rationalize the impossible. I wanted to run, to escape the suffocating fear, but something held me back. Against my better judgment, I called out, my voice trembling. "Who's there? What do you want?" Silence. Then, a soft sobbing echoed through the hallway, leading me further into the depths of the school. The sound tugged at my heart, compelling me to follow. I moved cautiously, each step feeling heavier than the last. The sobbing grew louder, more plaintive, until I reached the door to the headmistress's office. It was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, the sobbing stopped abruptly. The room was dark, but the flashlight revealed a desk, papers scattered across it, and an old, charred photograph of a class of children, the headmistress standing proudly behind them. Her eyes seemed to bore into mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. A cold breeze brushed past me, and I heard the door creak as it slowly closed behind me. I was trapped. Panic clawed at my throat as I spun around, the flashlight's beam dancing wildly across the room. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and the whisper returned, louder, more insistent. "Help us find peace." The temperature plummeted, and I could see my breath misting in the air. The flashlight flickered, then died, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, its weak light barely piercing the gloom. The shadows coalesced, forming the faint outlines of children, their eyes hollow, their expressions mournful. "We're lost," one of them whispered, stepping closer. "We can't find our way." I backed against the desk, heart pounding. "What do you need? How can I help?" The room seemed to pulse with a sorrowful energy, and the headmistress's voice, clear and commanding, echoed through the space. "Find the locket. Release us." Before I could ask what she meant, the shadows dissipated, and the room returned to its eerie stillness. The locket. It had to be somewhere in the school, something that had bound them to this place. Determined, I searched the office, sifting through the charred remnants of papers and books, until I found a small, ornate box. Inside was a silver locket, tarnished with age, but intact. I opened it, revealing a picture of the headmistress and a young girl. A sense of profound sadness washed over me as I realized this was her daughter. The locket must have held immense sentimental value, a connection that kept the spirits tethered to this world. With the locket in hand, I made my way back through the school, the atmosphere lighter now, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I reached the front entrance and stepped outside, the night air feeling warmer, more welcoming. I placed the locket on the ground and whispered a prayer, hoping to set the spirits free. A gust of wind swept through the courtyard, and I heard it again, the laughter of children. But this time, it was joyous, free. The oppressive weight that had hung over the school lifted, and for the first time in decades, the building seemed at peace. As I walked away, I glanced back and saw the faint outline of the headmistress in the doorway, her expression one of gratitude. The school, once a place of horror and sorrow, now felt like a resting place for those lost souls. And as I left, I knew I had given them what they had longed for, peace and closure. The stories would continue, no doubt, but now they would speak of a different kind of haunting, a tale of redemption, of setting things right, and I, forever changed by the experience, would carry the memory of that night with me, a reminder of the unseen world that exists just beyond our understanding. My wife, Emily, and I had always dreamed of owning a house with character, so when we stumbled upon the old Victorian on the outskirts of town, we knew we had found our project. Its grandeur was faded, but undeniable, with a history woven into every creak of its floorboards and every whisper of wind through its eaves. We moved in on a crisp autumn day, the air tinged with the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of change. The house was a monument to the past, its walls adorned with peeling wallpaper and its wooden floors scuffed with the passage of time. Despite its dilapidated state, we were in love. The renovations began immediately. We scrubbed, painted, and polished, turning forgotten rooms into cozy havens. It was in the dining room that we first noticed the stains. A series of dark, reddish-brown marks along one wall, seemingly innocuous at first glance, but deeply unsettling upon closer inspection. I tried scrubbing them away, but they persisted, as if the wall itself were bleeding. Emily dismissed my concerns, attributing the stains to rust or mold. But as the days passed, the marks grew darker and spread further. No amount of cleaning could banish them. It wasn't long before we began to sense something else in the house, something unseen but palpably present. One evening, while painting the living room, I found an old newspaper clipping tucked behind a loose floorboard. The headline read, "Brutal murder in Victorian mansion. Local woman found slain." My heart pounded as I read the article. The victim, Eleanor Green, had been discovered in the very house we now called home, her body horrifically mutilated. The case had never been solved. Emily was skeptical when I showed her the clipping, but she couldn't deny the connection between the story and the stains. We decided to do some research, visiting the local library and digging through archives. What we found was chilling. Eleanor Green's murder had been particularly gruesome. Her blood splattered across the walls of the dining room, exactly where we had found the stains. Determined to get to the bottom of this mystery, we continued our renovations with a sense of foreboding. The house seemed to resist our efforts, as if it were trying to communicate something. Strange noises echoed through the halls at night. Whispers, footsteps, the distant sound of sobbing. Doors opened and closed on their own, and cold drafts blew through rooms that should have been sealed tight. One night, as I lay in bed unable to sleep, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the dining room. I crept downstairs, my flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The scratching grew louder as I approached, seeming to come from behind the stained wall. My pulse quickened, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I reached out to touch the wall, and as my fingers brushed against the stains, a sudden, overwhelming sense of despair washed over me. Images flashed through my mind. Eleanor Green, her eyes wide with terror, blood pooling around her as she reached out for help that never came. I staggered back, gasping for breath, and the scratching ceased. The next morning, I told Emily what had happened. She suggested bringing in a medium, someone who might help us understand the restless spirit that seemed to haunt our home. Desperate for answers, I agreed. The medium, a stern woman named Margaret, arrived the following day. She walked through the house, her eyes closed, her lips moving in silent prayer. When she reached the dining room, she stopped and placed her hands on the stained wall. Her eyes flew open, and she let out a strangled cry. "She is here," Margaret whispered, her voice trembling. "She seeks justice. Her soul cannot rest until her killer is found." We pressed her for more details, but she shook her head. "The answers lie within the house," she said. "You must uncover the truth." Armed with this cryptic advice, Emily and I resumed our search. We scoured every inch of the house, looking for clues. It was in the attic that we found the journal, an old, leather-bound book hidden beneath a loose floorboard. The entries were written in a delicate, flowing script and dated back to the days leading up to Eleanor Green's death. The journal revealed a tale of love and betrayal. Eleanor had been involved with a man named Richard, a charming but volatile figure. Their relationship had turned sour, and Eleanor had feared for her life. She had written about seeking refuge in the house, hoping to escape Richard's wrath. Her final entry ended abruptly, a smear of blood staining the page. With this new information, we decided to confront the house's past head-on. We reached out to the local historical society, hoping to uncover more about Richard. What we found was a shock. Richard had been a well-respected figure in the community, his dark side hidden from all but a few. He had disappeared shortly after Eleanor's murder, his whereabouts unknown. Our discoveries seemed to agitate the spirit. The disturbances grew more frequent and violent. Objects were thrown across rooms, and an oppressive sense of dread hung over us like a shroud. It was clear that Eleanor's spirit was growing impatient, demanding justice. One stormy night, as lightning flashed and thunder rumbled, I felt a sudden compulsion to return to the dining room. Emily followed, her face pale with fear. The stains on the wall seemed to glow in the flickering candlelight, pulsating with an eerie, otherworldly energy. As we stood there, the air grew thick and suffocating. I could hear Eleanor's voice, faint but desperate, pleading for us to find her killer. In a moment of clarity, I realized what we needed to do. We had to bring Richard to justice, even if he was no longer alive. We contacted the authorities, presenting them with the journal and our findings. The case was reopened, and an investigation into Richard's past was launched. Weeks turned into months as the search for answers continued. During this time, the disturbances in the house lessened, as if Eleanor's spirit was watching and waiting. Finally, the breakthrough came. Richard had been living under an assumed name in a nearby town, his true identity concealed for decades. He was arrested and brought to trial, the evidence from Eleanor's journal damning enough to secure a conviction. The day Richard was sentenced, the house felt different. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of peace. The stains on the dining room wall faded, and the strange noises ceased. Eleanor's spirit had found the justice she had longed for, and with it, her rest. Emily and I continued our renovations, turning the old Victorian into the home we had always dreamed of. But we never forgot the terror we had faced, nor the brave woman who had sought our help from beyond the grave. The blood-stained walls had told her story, and we had listened.